back to the pod. Today, I'm speaking with Andrew DeBerry. It's going to be an exciting conversation because we're going to be talking about not just what is artificial intelligence, but use cases, second, third order consequences. How do we think about post AI adoption? And I know we may not be there today, but because we're building, we should be having these conversations now. So, Andrew, welcome to the pod.
Really excited to be here. I'm thrilled that you're hosting this conversation.
It's going to be really, really exciting. Just for our listeners out there, can you give us a quick, backstory, who you are, what got you into this line of work, and what's exciting you these days?
Yeah, for sure. So I've built a record so far of trying to bring value-centered technologies and emerging capabilities into the ugliest of environments. First in the military was leveraging computer vision for frontline undercover strikes that had zero civilian casualties, and then went on to draft responsible AI principles that are now being adopted across the full DoD. In big tech was working in the belly of the beast of meta ads, trying to introduce responsible principles for defending vulnerable groups within the ads engine. Also in the wake of some lawsuits and very angry consumers as well. And then most recently, looking at how to apply AI in a faithful way in the ugliness of the finance industry and how to re-leverage tools to promote more transparency about companies that we invest in, because if we like our lives reflecting our values, our own investment should reflect that as well. So very exciting time. There are a lot of values-oriented groups and builders that are addressing this head on for what it means in a tangible way for applications and for their businesses. So thrilled to be a part of this big emerging dialogue.
That's really cool. It seems like you like these Goliath problems, like using technology to solve some pretty not easy to solve problems. Is that just like your upbringing? Is that who you are? Do you like challenges? Like what's the backstory there?
Yeah, it's interesting that you call that out. There is an underlying goal of serving where there is the least amount of light in some ways. And the head of Sequoia talks about the distance traveled, meaning how far you've come from where you are. And for myself, I did grow up in a single father military family in Southern public schools and saw that there's so much more potential than was experiencing in some of those environments, and worked hard, prayed hard, eventually was, by the grace of God and lots of community love, was able to get a full scholarship to Notre Dame, studied aerospace engineering, Catholic social teaching, public policy, went into the military, got a master's in Arabic and eventually an MBA from the Wharton School, along with a master's in national security strategy. And then from there went to work in global education, Microsoft, and up-leveled into emerging tech. So there has been this long-standing quest of, I know that where I'm at can be so much better than what it is. So
Hmm.
admittedly, there's a run away from component because I know there's challenge there. But secondly, that there's a deep calling that our faith brings us towards, that it's very inspiring. That's, faith or not faith, there's general human goodness that draws us forward. And we all need to have this dialogue in a collective, inclusive way.
Yeah, it's a pull. It looks like it's a pull for you, not just a push. So that's really inspiring to see. One of the things that inspired this conversation is just to give the context and the backstory is right now we're not there. I don't think we're fully there with the technology, the adaptation and the implementation, but I think we're going to be getting there pretty quickly, sooner than we think. And we have to start thinking about second and third order consequences of when we include or create new solutions that create net new, not just replacement. Replacement being, okay, cool, you got this thing and it's able to, automate 80% of a department's role, which is fine. What do you do with that department? How do you figure out net new value? How do you create new value through that team versus just letting people go and just like increasing P&L? The other one is like what the net new potential that we couldn't do before. And one of the examples I like to give just to bring it down to earth is for our audience when you're listening to this, what if, and this is just a big what if, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what if you never had to worry about your mortgage payment and your car payment for the rest of your life? And you start thinking about like, oh, okay, what do you do now? And then that kind of question, that little space, that's kind of like the inspiration for this. When we start creating solutions, technology that are able to allow us to think on that playing field, not because you're going to have more abundance or more money, but more about like new possibilities that we couldn't think about because our brains were wired to think about this other thing. That's the space we're entering. And I think, I mean, the legalists, they're doing their part, but they're not building. Other people who are building don't have guidelines. People are trying to create the guidelines, but they're not actual builders. So I think there's a match between us who are building, us who are out there actually creating, You specifically creating new technology, new ways to solve problems in industries that, are in some forms super lives, like our old industries. How do we have that conversation? That's what we're hosting here. So as you're seeing and you're doing this in real time, and we can speak from some of my experience as well in real time, but how are you formulating, if anything, a framework of thinking when you're looking at the second and third order consequences of an action or an implementation or net new value that you're creating through technology, specifically through AI?
For sure. I think what helps ground the full conversation is looking at the social value that we are aiming to create. And within that, what is the human experience, the human value, the human outcome that we are looking for? And if we take a step back from that perspective, it's very obvious that we want positive values, positive outcomes for humans, our relationships, our communities, what is good for us. So what we have to check ourselves against is going off of a isolated view of what human goodness looks like, as in it's only what is profitable, only what is utility, only what
Mm-hmm.
helps us achieve a specific action more efficiently. If we look at our own lives, we realize it's not driven 100% by efficiency. We have families, we get married, we do things that are beautifully inefficient, and we want to make sure that the technologies that we set up, that the underlying business structures that we have, the incentives that they facilitate that kind of goodness. It is helpful to have thoughtful individuals and also people who just blatantly state the obvious that the market should facilitate that. The market shouldn't just serve its own ends. And so it
Mm-hmm.
is good to continue to be clear about that. And if that means we introduce some other measures and other tests or benchmarks into the equation that hold us to account to live the way that our hearts want to be living, then let's go ahead and do that in a very practical way. Right now, it feels like Wall Street is miles ahead of us with very developed metrics, very developed patterns. But it is a field that can be influenced. So let's have that dialogue and see how we can do that.
That's interesting. You mentioned a few things, and there. Let me know which is the most prudent way to go. Either A, looking at the different metrics or benchmarks that we can measure, the ones that are currently existing, and the ones that we can measure against that maybe new. The other one, and I think you mentioned like the beautiful inefficient, which I think is pretty a wonderful way of saying it. Like if humans are like we have the tendency to be in relationship community, like that's part of our DNA, that's part of how we thrive as a species, as a culture, who we are. One of the arguments I heard is that the more technologically advanced that we have, it'll give us more time to do that. But to which end? Is that a value? Is that a metrics? Is that something that we should have as a benchmark? I'm curious to know like where should we take this conversation in any of those two realms?
Yeah. So I'll start big picture and then translate to more tactical. And so if we do want to have a fully most amazing, beautiful, connected human experience, we should have bold imagination for what that can look like. And with all due respect to some of the thoughtful tech leaders putting out manifestos and ideas, I hope that serves as a catalyst for the rest of us be articulating what we think the future of humanity should look like. And I do think philosophers and faith traditions have perhaps a few thousand years of thought on this. You know what? So does your grandma. So does my high school teacher. So does, in some ways, a 5-year-old. So we should listen to integrated voices who should share that vision. Once we have that, then let's look at how do we enable the tools and the human relationships that best facilitate that. And so I personally do advocate for a hybrid approach. There are ways that we leverage technologies now that reduce human suffering and take the drudgery out of unnecessary manual tasks and in many ways uplift and amplify that human connection. Uh, we don't necessarily need individuals like my grandmother had doing manual switches on a phone switch so that two people can communicate with each other. We have these amazing telecommunications capabilities that enable conversations around the world. I think that's a interesting use case. So if we were to translate that then to some more tangible metrics, then certainly we have all the quarterly profit driven numbers that Wall Street lives and dies by, and that is of our making. Let's state that. But what about other metrics that we can introduce into that as well? What about human welfare? What about strength of communities? What about
Hmm.
strength of relationships, of marriages, of the common good? We do have some things that float out there, like the Gini coefficient. We can look at, say, divorce rates. There are some different indexes that look at the happiness ratings of different countries. And so those are starts. So we can
Mhm.
dig further into those. For builders, we are very familiar with benchmarks. So where is the more holistic benchmark? It's interesting that AI has all of these, some ways, very technical, isolated views into what's better than the other, and we put them against each other on Chatbot Arena. But what about the other measures? I admire work from Glue, where they look at a human flourishing index. And so
Hmm.
that's a start. Even more out there a little bit is the Humanities Last Exam benchmark. And so that's creative. There's some big things in there. So that's at least something more comprehensive than just how well does it score in an AP math test. So
Yeah.
we should have that dialogue of like, okay, what does a more holistic benchmark look like? And then how do we build standards behind that? How do we do evals against that? And then reflect that. I don't think any AI wants to say, wow, we actually score terribly on child safety. Where's that dialogue at? So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to some like no-brainer wins that we can have in this space.
That's fascinating. And I think to kind of counter that as well, in a positive lens, like to carry on that, but also ask you a question. When you're building this, like the number one benchmark, most builders are like EBITDA, revenue, cost savings, net new capacity. Those are like the obvious ones, the ones in the business that we can measure. What would be, I mean, again, I'm not looking for the easiest answer, but it's just practical. Like, here's something we can start doing now, and then we can explore further as we get more elaborated in creating these new benchmarks. Like, the first benchmark to hit is always a business one, at least right now, where we stand in 2020, at December 2025. You implemented this thing, it increases capacity, costs, you have savings, usually driven to the P&L. Should we include human flourishing there? What are some ideas that we can practically put in there to not just say, hey, we did this thing, you unlocked, you know, 12 million in annual savings or whatever. What else could we be thinking about? And that's what I want to inspire here is like, what else can we add to that? It's like, oh, by the way, your team is taking less time off through sick leave, or your team is able to have more. Like, how do we do that? And what's the most practical approach that you're seeing for that?
Yeah, practical. So I like that a lot in terms of change management and adoption. So I always articulate things in terms of a crawl, rock, run. What are low-hanging fruit? And, what is the big dream? So we've talked a little bit about what does the big dream look like that even Wall Street cares about human flourishing. My goodness. But what can we do today? So if we look at where can we move the movable? There's two answers that come to my mind pretty quickly. One is if we look at what has a lot of social excitement and technical excitement and policy excitement in business assignment, those four areas that there's consensus only on a few topics. And one of them is screaming loud and clear of child safety. And we should
Mm.
start to talk through what are the basic tests that should be standardized across all companies. And from working within some of these teams, I know that they're out there. So why are they not pervasive across all products? How in the world did some of these
Mm.
experiences get approved, research, but still approved and out into the market? There should be strong call outs from the industry about that before they even go out the door. So there's that. And testing that red teams these things against common scenarios and edge cases and provides us like a very transparent benchmark. A second thing is regulatory. And for better or for worse, regulations do capture a lot of values. Often they come in with a pretty strong hammer after some bad things have happened. And so in many ways, they're reactive. So we could look at any of the four states that have passed AI regulations. We could start with, say, Colorado, could be the most progressive, and see how compliant any of these AI-based solutions might be against those regulations, which aim to capture like baseline minimum standards for how a solution should operate. So those are two ways to look forward. I mean, I don't think there's a single app builder out there that is okay with having a good EBITDA and good customer acquisition cost trend, and then is blatantly red on legal parameters. So
Yeah.
those are some easy places to start that we can all rally around, no matter what community we come from.
Yeah, that's the beginning too, and maybe because I'm a little bit more ignorant. And like, are there benchmarks that we can just plug and play that we can measure? Let's say you're building for another company, and you want to look at, okay, we EBITDA, legal cost savings, etc. but is there a way for us to measure the safety of the AI for their team, for their mental health, maybe for time off? Like, what other things could we, or is this like new territory that we have to build these things and we're still like in the beginning essence of writing these declarations and like these different like manifestos within?
Yeah, right now it's like all levels. There's plenty of green space at all levels. And so, sure, at the regulations piece, you can even draft ideas and proposals to policy influencers or think tanks or even academic groups. But more on the practical side is I like your idea of what are some, say, employee welfare metrics, like the number of absent employees, or there are climate surveys. What does the math say about that? And how do these tools work with them? We should
Hmm.
conceive of the design of these experiences. I really want to hear a lot more from the product design and the UX design community because I feel like they have a lot of thoughts to share about how do you design things that leverage, maximize the benefits of technology, but very much listen to the EQ of the human. So how do you bring
Hmm.
those two together in ways that amplify the human connection while still leveraging the benefit of the tool so that one does not displace the other? Or if one is getting so strong that at least gives the other one time to pause and reflect and pace that evolution, so the change happens with the human, not against the human. My goodness. So some just say employee welfare metrics could be a good thing. And then you're right, in the middle, there are some emerging metrics that are published on archive.org. And so you can look at the human flourishing papers out there, but there's also papers for fairness. That is certainly a social good. There's more and more papers that rotate around some common industry standards, be it transparency, bias, reliability. Um,
So
those
this seems
are,
kind of obvious, right? Like the transparency and reliability. Like we want that. We want transparency, and I'm hoping that the thing produces a reliable answer. So I think that makes a lot of sense to include as the obvious, right? Include it with the legal and regulatory.
transparent in particular is a good one because obviously, yes, but the reality of, at least with transform models, is that the math behind them is so complex that, these emergent
Yeah.
properties are hard to fully explain. And, there are some startups and other frontier coders that are trying to find ways to have kind of each explanation explain itself. So I think Anthropic's taking shots at that as well. But yeah, we should keep raising the bar there so that when something does come out that we don't feel comfortable with, we can explain why and adjust it. Otherwise, it's still mysterious and has some liabilities that go along with it.
It almost sounds like it's also, I wouldn't say the word personal preference, but it feels like what's when you're looking at creating these additional benchmarks, first you have to want to do it. I think we should push to do that. Like it should be a maybe not a mandatory, but like let's make that a common obvious thing. Like everyone pays attention, at least hopefully they do, at the street lights, the green, yellow, and red. Like at least they're doing that. Hopefully here in AI we can also have that common sense. But it also sounds like I'd have to customize because you could also manipulate these preferences or like these different additional benchmarks to self feed yourself just to look better. But I think that you, not personal preference, but like customizing it based on the industry that you're serving and the prevalent problems that are relevant either to the company or the clients that you serve, or just again what they actually care about. Because there's a lot of causes that not everyone is always behind. Is that kind of also a sentiment that you're seeing, or is that am I way off?
I think there's actually a lot of momentum in some deeply business oriented metrics. So it is good to have solutions that clients love. I mean, I do like, I don't know, say having a shoe that works effectively and helps me do what I want to do. I do like when I have brand love for something. And so there's a measure of humanity in that experience. So it's
Hmm.
not just like I have a moral safeguard that I have to follow after I build my business metrics. I want to give credit to what product driven businesses do in many ways already think about, but I would just invite a deeper thought about at what point does it become exploitative and it doesn't factor in, to your point, the second and third order effects that have
Hmm.
some negative externalities that are painful. And as a company or as an organization, do they only rely on what's coming out from regulations, or are they
Yeah.
willing to craft a better narrative that might actually differentiate them because that is what clients want? Like while we have incentive structures, we're not powerless automatons that can't adjust and influence the criteria that we select as humans, and even as shareholders with shareholder value obligations, we can still influence what we do here.
How are you doing that right now with the organizations and the products that you're building?
Sure. So within Araminthy Investing, which is where I'm currently a president working with a very talented team underneath the CEOship of Dan Gatone, and we also believe we have some spiritual support under spiritual CEO St. Joseph of Araminthy, our patron. We are looking at ways to transform finance so that you are investing in ways that reflect your values. And I'm looking at ways to apply AI to look at what companies are already sharing about themselves publicly in filings and then also in leadership statements, and then comparing them against published guidelines that, at least within the Catholic Church, are available for how to invest with your faith in mind. And so that helps accelerate the effectiveness of making sure that what we invest in are resonate with who we are. But there's still a lot of human components to that as well, where we'll have relationships with people that are caring about this space. We'll do direct phone calls to companies to learn more about their values positioning and to see what the specific policies they might have that aren't published out loud. So there's a way that we are constructing the AI technologies to amplify that human connection in ways that
Mm.
result in the client having something that actually lifts up their values and their humanity and not having it ripped away by a purely utilitarian based AI.
It sounds like, I mean, to do like a meta analysis of that, like you're leading with a point of view. You're leading with this, like, this is the stance and the belief, and then you're creating technology to reinforce that in alignment with human flourishing. I mean, not to oversimplify it.
That's a great call out. I think there's something about humans have values. We have hearts and
Yeah.
intent, and we should center on that and we should resurface that and renew that before we start just blindly putting in technologies. Like we have a lot of
Yeah.
power inside of our beautifully inefficient humanity. So, and that centers us for how we design the experiences around that.
Yeah. I think that's really important to mention too, because one of the things that when I work with teams or I work in positioning either companies or offers or just like stances, I think right now with technology, the biggest competitive advantage is not going to close the deal. It's not something that people are just going to sign on the dot because of this. But I actually think that belief is making a significant draw on the people that you attract, on the audiences that you create, on the employees that you hire, on the clients that you serve. And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the CEOs are doing their own manifestos, which is a way of saying, here's my belief and stance on it. And then that drives their investments, that drives the engineers that they hire, that drives the companies that they fund and build. And I think that's an interesting point. So to kind of bring it full circle here, these are the conversations in order, like, what are the values that matter? What are the values that we should care about? What are the values of like a post AI future? Because some of that, I mean, I'm not sure how real this is, but like a small percentage could be like AI is more powerful than humans, and how does that dictate the values of humanity? Um, yeah, any comments on that?
I agree with all the points that you're making that we should make the values that we have more tangible. And I do think there's something about having objective measures to clarify if someone really means what they're saying. There
Hmm.
is some goodness to having companies make public statements. And for better or for worse, the SEC has challenged, at least in our industry, stakeholders that claim certain values positions and then don't do the hard work beneath it. And the SEC catches them and binds them for misleading investors. So it is important for us to continue leading with our values and shaping not only our workplaces, but also who we invest in. As shareholders of companies, we actually have a very powerful right to write to the companies and advocate for changes that we want them to make. And that is also another lever that we can pull to influence this broader conversation.
Do you think there's going to be a mega regulatory on AI and how companies are applying it? Like, is that going to happen, or what? I mean, we're so fresh in this. I know just a couple weeks ago there was a tweet about there has to be one rule book, but I don't know if we actually made any progress there. Where do you see the industry going?
It's a fine question. So I can say right now that the national government level within the US is very anti-regulation on AI. And now states instead are steadily coming out with their own laws. So And that is all in contrast to the EU AI Act, which is very AI regulation forward. Some have even called it very aggressive and more aggressive than monopoly legislation inside of the EU. And so some would argue that is too painful and too restrictive. So, especially in the wake of, say, another entity that might not care as much about some of these values, like in China. So, there's an endless debate that goes on in the national security circles about how to ensure a responsible use of AI, but not capitulate competitiveness to an adversary that doesn't. But overall, I don't see that there will be an overarching rule book or regulation per se. I do think that there's all kinds of green space for us to keep articulating what we're all inviting each other to do. So still at the NIST level, the standardization levels, at the individual levels where we can start measuring our own wellness measures that we care about. So I think at minimum, we should still look at some of the states like that. That could be a middle ground of, okay, well, for better or for worse, we want to do business in some of these states. We're going to have to work with them. And then if there's a trend that there's going to be more and more states adopting it, then we'll have to pay attention. There are at least 48 states with deepfake regulations. And so that is one example for where we do need to really pay attention to what the regulations are saying.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. And again, we're in the beginning of this. So I really do appreciate you helping us create this dialogue and this move forward of what things we should be thinking about, the questions we should be asking internally and at a communal level, and also building community forward here. For our listeners out there, Andrew, where's the best place for people to, one, thank you for being on, and two, get a hold of you?
Yeah, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you can put in that little comment that shows how you might know that person, how you found them, that helps as well. So I love having these kind of dialogues. If it's helpful to speak with a leader on your team or with your full team or just one-on-one over chat, whatever's helpful for you, just let me know and we can find time.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, I appreciate you being on and thank you for having this conversation.
Keep going. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-in, so you can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.